Does anyone know what type of car was the most popular car on the road in 1986?
Honda Civic.
Minivan.
The
A
shooter.
Chevrolet Celebrity. When was the last time we ever saw or thought about a Chevrolet Celebrity? How many of us have boats around the 1986 range? Just put that in perspective out here.
Ever wondered how much wear and tear your sailboat really goes through? In this episode, Alex Teeft takes us through a breakdown of essential boat maintenance, from inspecting keels and through hulls, to rigging, stanchions and lifelines. Learn why your boat's aging components might need more attention than you think, and how to prevent costly failures before they happen.
And then when you think about the sport of sailing, it might be one of the only sports out there that lets us go racing with zero tech inspections at all. I mean, we want to send little kids out in their go-karts on the track on a Sunday. There's tech inspections for little Timmy's, on the go-kart. And what happens when he breaks down? He pulls over. You know what I mean? Nobody drowns. No, you know what I mean? Nothing really happens. He just pulls over and Dad runs over and fixes the cart. You do that same thing with an opti. The kids floating down the road. You know what I mean? We need help, right? As far as all the sports in the world, sailing is the one that really trusts you to take care of your own equipment. Nobody else is coming in other than a survey every 5 years because of your insurance. Nobody's really coming on your boat and checking things over for you. We all think about going to the Binnacle or whatever chandlery is in the town that we live and work and buying new lines. That's great. We put new sails on. Well, that's like going and taking our 1986 Chevy Celebrity and just putting a new engine in it. There's still rust holes. There's still a lot of other stuff going on, but it's got a nice new engine. It'll keep going for a while. I talked today about inspecting our own boat. Our own little tech inspection, things that we can do, what we can go over and look at our own boats to give ourselves the peace of mind that we're going out there with the best chance of success. Because I remember in Learn to Sail and with all the race teams and stuff, Sail Canada came out with this thing of the different types of racers as kids. And there's the kids that are really good at tactics. There's the kids that are really good at just hiking and grinding, going out there and just working really hard. There's another category of the kids that are the boat builder. The kid that really makes sure his boat is ready to go, it's never going to break down on the race. And if you can go out there for a whole season and know that your boat's never going to break down, or pretty confident that your boat's not going to break down again, you're step up. You know what I mean? Like that, you're doing pretty good already. I guess we're going to start with the bottom of the boat. We'll just work our way up. So on the bottom of the sides of our boats, something we can do this time of the year on a sunny day, all the boats on the cradle and stuff. Start from the bottom, we can look at the fairness of our keel. You know what I mean? Everyone knows the fairer the keel, the smoother everything is going to be, the faster you're going to go. Well, it makes a big difference, within reason. If knife edging your keel for 30 hours in the spring, it's probably not going to make up for the bad tack that you had in the middle of the race. It's all within reason. So the fairness of keel is something that we all need to look at, and I think gets a little bit too much looked at versus the other stuff on the boat that actually keeps us together and keeps us safe. So moving up from the fairness of the keel, we got the keel joint. So as our keel bolts onto our boat, there's bolts there, everything. This is a joint that can flex. And I mean, these boats have gone through a lot of tacks, they've gone through a lot of jibes. They're sat of the marina for a lot of hurricanes, stuff like that. Make sure you look around your boat for stress cracking. Any sort of cracking around the hull on the boat, around the keel, is something to be concerned about, Whether it be big, whether it be bad, you know what I mean? Just check it out. Cracking doesn't happen for no reason. Boats don't really come from the factory with cracking, so that happened over time. And we're going to get into a little bit here. So the next thing we're going to look at around our boat as we're inspecting everything is all the through hulls. If you're a cruiser and you're reading all the different cruising books and you want to go sail around the world, everybody talks about through hulls. Do you know how many racing boats I've gone on and I see plastic through hulls or stuff that's just, the seacock just does not shut off. It's just as important on a racing boat. You know what I mean? Like sinking happens just as fast for everybody.
Submarine, very slow.
Yes.
Very slow as a submarine.
So, you know what I mean? It's worth some time to go around and check all those things out. Because if you're trying to go for a Wednesday night series and you're trying to collect points, all of a sudden you have a leaky boat and you got to haul out for 2 weeks. Well, where's your points going, right? So this is all part of the big race. If a NASCAR team can't go to half the races in the series, they're not going to do anything in the end of the year, right? So it's the same thing for us, but we just have to think about it ourselves. Another thing that's in a lot of old race boats is old electronics. How many times do you look around your boat and you see the old depth sounder and you think, I don't use that anymore. Because it doesn't work. Well, what's it doing then? You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things that you can buy a plug, you know what I mean? Like, the Binnacle will sell you the cap kit that removes the actual old transducer with all its electronics and just puts a plug in there. That's a good option. Anything's a better option than just leaving it there and thinking, it's never going to go bad. Because if it already stopped working, the next step is for it to start leaking. It's just a matter of transition there. Next thing is your prop. Everybody goes out and buys really nice folding props and then doesn't grease them. You have to grease it. You have to make sure it's going to fold for you. When you sit, when you put that boat in neutral, when you start sailing, if you've paid all the money for a folding prop, you want to make sure that works. Go down there, inspect it. It's got to be smooth like butter. If it's not smooth like butter, you can't expect the water force as you're sailing along to close that prop for you. So that's something that's really, and if you're having a folding prop and it's not folding for you, that's significantly causing boat speed issues while you're racing. While we're down under the boat, we're going to look for blisters, osmosis. You might not see as much of it. It might be covered up by old bottom paint, but this is something that you're going to look for while you're doing your bottom for the spring. As we're sanding things down, if you have anything that doesn't look right, should be investigated. There's nothing on the boat that should be a different color than the rest. As you sand down through your bottom paint, if the boat's original, you're going to find a barrier coat, you're going to find gel coat underneath that, what you're finding. If you find an old repair, have a look at it. If you find blistering or bubbling or anything or voids, inspect them. Do something about them, because putting more bottom paint on them doesn't make them go away. And it's just sooner or later you're going to have to sand that new bottom paint out of that void. So I guess that's the hull stuff that I think everybody should look at every year. Moving on, while we're under the boat, is we need to look at our rudder. A rudder is one of those things that, if you look at a lot of big boat failures, they have rudder failures. And the reason we have rudder failures is because there's a lot of forces on that, and we never really look at them. We all just kind of put the boat in the water, but you got to get under your boat to the bottom of your rudder and wrench on it. Make sure that thing's not moving side by side. If there's anything other than smooth, like steering, smooth, like no play, there's probably issues. Because if there's play or anything other than smoothness on your rudder, when you're hanging on in your cradle and in the best of conditions, when you get out there heeled over and trying an emergency situation, you're going out the back door, while you're racing, that's when your rudder is going to be really stiff. If you're ever fighting weather helm is going to be even stiffer when the rudder stock is getting jammed up sideways. So not only do you have the pressure of the rudder, the water pressure to fight against, now you're actually fighting a jammed up bushing for your rudder. So check out the rudder, check out your rudder bushings. If you have a transom hung rudder, check out your gudgeons. Make sure that your gudgeons and your pintles aren't floppy. It's worth, taking things off. It's always worth taking bolts out, checking out the bedding, putting the bolts back together. A couple stainless steel bolts is cheap insurance while in the spring while you're taking things apart and putting them back together. So now we're to the water line. One thing I want everybody to look at on their boat, if you have an inboard, is your exhaust output. Your wet exhaust output on these boats typically is just above the water line. Great. When you're not heeled over, this is awesome. We're cruising around. As soon as we start racing, we start pushing our boats hard, that exhaust outlet now typically goes underwater. If there's any issues there, we're going to start seeing them. If that exhaust outlet, which prime example is one of those Catalinas that were popular in 1986, use a plastic fitting. And while heeled, becomes under the water line. So now that's one of those situations that if it breaks, you're sinking. So just take a look at it. It's just one of those things that we often overlook. We think ropes, we think cleats, we think sails, but we never think about the simple little things like that. The boots, everybody always asks me about the boot stripe on your boat. It's, Gary was talking about it earlier, that somebody had done a bad job painting it roughly. Well, of course, if you're just cruising around in the parades, your boot stripe's sitting nice and pretty out of the water. But as soon as you start sailing upwind and you heel over, guess what? That ugliness is under the water. So you spent all your time trying to smooth your hull. Wet sand your boat, fair everything out, make it smooth. The top side of your boat is nice and gorgeous. And then that boot stripe is rough. It's just a small thing that, you know what I mean, as you go over the heel over, you did all that work underneath the boat, you may as well do all that work to make your boot stripes smooth too, because it is under the water. I want everybody to look along the top side of your boat. When you get up closer to your hull to deck joint, look for cracking along here. And underneath your tow rail, along the actual hull sides of your boat, if you're seeing cracking in those areas, which probably not going to find, hopefully everybody goes out this spring and looks for this stuff and doesn't see it. But if you do see that cracking, you got to investigate where it came from. Did this come from, is this obviously from an impact that happened at a dock at one point? You know what I mean? Is there cracking that's from an old collision? Or is this cracking that's right beside your chain plates or right beside a bulkhead in the boat that's indicating something else is happening? Because oftentimes when you see cracking along the sides of the boat, it indicates a bulkhead issue inside. The cracking coincides with the bulkhead that's sitting inside the boat. So that's a stress riser, and as everything moves around, one of the first indicators is those cracks on the outside of the boat. So have a look for those. Hopefully we don't see any. Another thing along the engine side is outboard brackets. If your boat has an outboard, like a lot of boats around here, check it out. You know what I mean? It's one of the last things we ever look at. When the outboard falls off the back of the boat, it's expensive. It's slow. I've been out in my J24 in a regatta in a race one year here in the Danjon, dragging my 8 horsepower off the back. Didn't realize.
I remember that. Teeft.
Yes, yeah, that was me. Like so.
And it happened in 3 different coach boats. The whole transom came off.
It happens. You know what I mean? So outboard.
In short, check your outboard
bracket. Outboard brackets are one of those things that, like, on a Wednesday night when you're getting all gung-ho to go racing, you're getting the beer on the boat, you're getting the sails out from down below. You know, those little clamps on your outboard, just make sure they're tight. It's just one of those things that, you know, we're going sailing, so we forget about the motoring aspect. And we need that motor to get us home a lot of times. I mean, we can all sail home, but it's a lot easier to motor. Once we get up past the tow rails, we're going to go on the deck. So then the biggest thing I want everybody to look at on their deck is their chain plates. Where your shrouds come down, attached to your deck. And they can be different on a lot of different types of boats. Typically on the boats we see around here at the club, they go through your deck and bolt to a bulkhead. Well, the thing I want everybody to do is while your mast is down this winter, take that, and there's no strain from your shrouds, take those chain plates and see if there's any movement. There shouldn't be any movement up or down, side to side, anything like that. Sometimes what happens is when the mast is up and everything's tensioned, we don't notice that there's a different issue. But what happens is where that chain plate is bolted to your bulkhead, the holes get wallered out. So what happens, that chain plate's not sitting where it's supposed to be sitting anymore. And of course, that allows for some flex. So then on your leeward side of your boat, the shroud that's not, super tensed is going to move. You tack, it has a jolt. Anything that's moving is having weird stresses on it. So you want to make sure that those chain plates are in good shape, bolted to the bulkhead well. There's not very many boats that you're going to look down below and find chain plates and don't see water stains coming around. If there's water stains, that means water came through the deck there. Investigate that area. There's typically bad core in the deck. If there's going to be in that area, if there's ever going to be bad core in the deck, while that won't hurt your sailing performance, it's something that definitely will hurt the life of the boat, if that makes a difference. We're trying to keep these things for a long time, I guess. The next thing I'm going to bring up is your mast step. Mr. Matthew here this fall was a prime example of it. He comes to me and mentions, Alex, I think my mast step is spongy or moving or something because I see my mast moving when we're sailing upwind. I said, that's not good. That's really not good.
I would like credit for identifying that was not good. Going to a professional.
I think there's a problem here. And I said, yeah, there's a problem here. So he had the deck step mast. And then, of course, there's a nice aluminum boast down below deck that goes from the keel up to underneath the side.
That part was solid.
That was solid as hell. The mast come down the deck, solid as hell. The core in that section of the deck, spongy. They had used plywood inside that area, and it's spongy. So now if he's seeing that deflection upwind, and you spent all this time putting turns on your shrouds and thinking to yourself, you know what I mean? This is the sail, I want this many turns on my shrouds. That doesn't mean anything when your mast just starts going up and down in between every tack.
Yes, Teeft. All the time my uncle spent with a loose gauge this summer, totally wasted.
So things like that are worth checking. I mean, you can spend all the money in the world on new sails, new rigging, new running rigging, new shrouds, everything. You can go out, spend all the money. If you're not hooking it to a solid foundation on your boat, you can't even figure out how to tune that. So you got to make sure that everything on your boat is solid. So mast step, chain plates. Next thing we're going to talk about is traveler. Typically on a lot of boats, you'll see cracking on a boat around where the traveler bar is mounted. Not unheard of. You know what I mean? It happens. It's a good time to get into why a lot of this cracking has happened. So in 1986, in the 80s, even in the 90s, not that long ago, buying Dyneema zero stretch rope was unheard of. Back in the day, we had wire halyards spliced to rope so we could tie it around a cleat to reduce the stretch. Now it's so easy to go and replace everything with Dyneema lines. Well, they have no give. Now, of course, all these boats were built with the boat builder in mind, put all of the fittings on your boat with the thought that, well, nothing's going to get shocked that hard because there's still some stretch in the line. Well, now we're all going out and buying zero stretch lines. Now every shock load is being felt by the boat a lot more than they ever thought it was going to feel through that hull. And of course, it's happening when the boats are old. You know what I mean? So we're getting the double whammy. So check things like around your traveler bar, around your jib tracks, stuff like that. Is there going to be a little bit of cracking? Well, yeah, we race these boats hard when there's wear and tear on them. But if there's anything significant, or another thing you can do is get yourself a nice bar. Put some foam or something around the end, and actually go around with a lever and pry up on these things on your deck. Anything that's going to hold your sail, anything that's taking any running rigging, pry up on. Use a pry bar, on deck and see if this is flexing. If you can see it flexing, you can be sure it's flexing while you're sailing. And don't get me wrong, it's probably fine but as soon as you start pushing boats and racing situations, something's going to give, right? So those are what we're looking for. Of course, now on the decks, we're going to talk about like our cleats, jammers, winches, all that stuff. That's our next biggest frustrating factor. So there's nothing worse than going out in the race and you got your jib perfectly trimmed, but now you can't get it into the cleat because the little spring is broken. You know what I mean? Or the spring keeps falling open or all that stuff. It's time to fix it. You know what I mean? There's no sense in being frustrated out on the race course. Let's make everything work. For the sense of a $30 cleat, it's not worth having 3 hours of frustration over the summer every time you do it. Winches. If you ever wonder why, sometimes you're really grinding these sails in, when was the last time you serviced your winch? You know what I mean? When was the last time you took that bad boy apart and really greased it? And get all the old grease off and the new stuff? Because, a lot of that, force that you're going to crank in on your sail is just friction in the winch itself. If you're talking about getting a lot more people out, you want to get kids out on your boat to crew with you, you want everything to be a lot more able and, open for people. Reducing some of those loads is huge, right? If you want to be able to get the 15-year-old kid from the race team to come out and race on your boat for the summer, let's make it easy for them. Let's just give them the best chance. So all those things are to be considered. Jib cars, a little bit of lube, all that stuff goes a long way. I know everybody doesn't really think about it too much because there's a lot when you're getting ready to go racing. But if you just dedicate one person on your boat with the can of lube, it doesn't have to be expensive sailboat McLube. You can go to Canadian Tire and buy a can of generic silicone lubricant, spray it on all your jib tracks, spray it on that sort of stuff. It's just simple maintenance. It's really good. And again, if you're trying to adjust stuff and there's friction on all your hardware, it's just working against you. It's not necessarily unsafe, but it's certainly not good. Speaking of that, all their deck fittings. So I mentioned things about bad core on your deck and water getting in. Well, where does that water come from? It comes from all these holes that we put in our sailboats to put our cleats and our rigging on. And if you get on anybody's race boat, you can see all the remnants of all those other spots that people had it rigged separately, differently, and you didn't like that, so you moved the track over here, or you did this. Well, all those old holes, those are where the waters are coming from. So it's worth, if nothing else, go over your boat, check for all those areas, and it's worth going over your boat, all your hardware, cleats, stuff like that, the bedding that's actually sealing underneath them only lasts so many years. You know what I mean? You get a dock line, working a cleat, your dock cleats, eventually the bedding underneath that is no longer holding water away. It's filling the gap so you don't see the difference in the gap between the deck and the cleat, but it's not holding water out anymore. So if you want one good thing to do to your boat for preventative maintenance, is just go around, take a few fittings off around your cockpit, clean the backside of them, make sure that your screw holes are not all wallered out and everything. If you have to, squirt a little epoxy into that screw hole and re-drill it, and rebed your fittings with new sealant. Speaking of sealant, I don't recommend 5200. Everybody will use this term 5200 for everything. It's a great product, but it's permanent. Inevitably, you will want to rechange things on your deck, or those fancy new clutches or the fancy new hardware will come out and it'll be on sale at the boat show, and you'll buy it and you'll want to put it on. So don't go for 5200, go for 4200. There is a difference there. When you're at the store, always think 4200 or 4000. Try to avoid 5200 like the plague, just because it will damage your boat when you try and pull the stuff off. It'll take gel coat with it. So, other stuff that we should look at on our deck probably be the non-skid. It's an important thing for racing. You know what I mean? People need to get around. They need to get around safely. Most boats have a factory non-skid that came molded in the gel coat. I mean, that's kind of long gone at this point. It's not super grippy. There are other options. Nothing is ever going to compare to the original factory molded non-skid on your boat. That's just, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It's the best thing. It's going to look the most appropriate. It's going to look the most factory. There is other things you can do. There's products like Kiwi Grip. There's, you can use a thickened gel coat and make your own kind of gel coat non-skid. There's a lot of options, but, I guess it doesn't matter what option you take. Just make sure you do something for your bow guy, so he's not just going completely off the bow every time he rides up there. So, you can even do things like the old J24 tricks of just putting grip tape all over your deck. Grip tape is, it's ugly, but it certainly keeps people on the boat, and that's kind of part of the game, right? Hatches and stanchions. Those are the next things that we really want to look at. Hatches, pretty important. They keep the water out. Big thing I like to look at on hatches is, do they actually dog down? So many people have hatches in all their boats that don't actually dog down. So you need to make sure that your hatch not only closes, but it stays closed. I mean, if there's two latches, you need at least one of those to work. Because if your hatch is going to open or going to somehow come open, it's going to happen at the worst time. And then the other thing that we need to worry about hatches is, I guess, not necessarily the clarity of the screen, but the integrity of the hatch. We don't necessarily tell everybody to walk on hatches on the boat, but in a racing situation, it happens. We need to make sure that we don't have the Lexan or the plexiglass or whatever somebody had put in there at some point is all crazed out and is one footstep away from breaking somebody's leg. So that's a big thing on a race boat that probably isn't a big concern on a cruising boat. Because on a cruising boat, you can just tell your guests, don't step on the hatches. In the middle of a couple jives, your bow guy doesn't have an option. So that's important. And then the stanchions. Stanchions are pretty much bad on everybody's boat, let's be honest. If the boat's more than 10 years old, the stanchions probably could take some love. A lot of times, we're just going to have to tighten things up. I mean, at the end of the day, stainless is one of those things that it's, stayed together really good. Stainless nuts will back themselves off if there's no Loctite or anything on there. So the first plan of attack with our stanchions is to go around our boat, get a friend on the top side with the screwdriver or the wrench, go around and tighten everything up. If you're tightening things up and you see the deck squishing, or you see things kind of moisture coming out or cracking happening, that's bad. That's an issue. But a lot of times with stanchions, because there's so many people hiking off the side of the boat, there's so much pressure on them. It's hard to get them to stop leaking. It's hard to get them shored up on these old boats without doing a complete deck refit in that area. So don't be afraid to put a big backing plate on them. You know what I mean? A backing plate is like something that's going to save your crew from going over the boat. But I need you to understand that the backing plate needs to be bigger than the base of the stanchion. So if you have a stanchion base that's only 6 inches wide, down underneath your deck, you really want to get 12 inches, a 12-inch square of backing plate. And then backing plate material makes a difference. Aluminum, look, it's great. It's easy for us to cut. It's easy to work with. It bends pretty good unless you get it thicker. So if you can get yourself a thick piece of fiberglass, a thicker piece of stainless steel, even though stainless is heavy, even if we're going to do backing plates and you want to use aluminum for lightweight, look for aluminum angle instead of just flat bar. Because flat bar is going to just, accommodate to all the different woes in the deck as you tighten it up. The angle iron or the angle bar will give you some stiffness. So I guess that's all I'm going to say about stanchions, because we could go on forever about fixing those.
That's next week's talk.
Yeah, I guess the big thing, next thing we got to talk about is the rigging and the controls. So your rudder and your tiller. That's the thing that we're actually driving the boat with. But we don't give a whole lot of love to. So how many people on their boats have a tiller extension? When was the last time we checked the universal joint between the tiller extension and the tiller? Yeah.
When it exploded last year.
Yes. So these things are like $12. They're literally like a $12 part, and it's typically the same part that the kids use on their opties. So just keep that in mind. It's not really meant for our big boats that we're playing with. So one of the main things that you can do, with your tiller and your helm experience, is just revamp all that stuff. Make sure that your tiller, where it bolts onto the head of the rudder, is tight. If there's sloppiness, if you grab your tiller and there's sloppiness side to side, how do you precisely control your boat when you can't precisely actually actuate the rudder with what's in your hand? So the rudder, you could spend a good day in the spring on your rudder and not feel bad. You know what I mean? Just tweaking it, putting the universal joint on it. Again, make sure that tiller properly mates to your rudder head. You know what I mean? If you have to take that off, take the bolt off and put shims in there, do it. You know what I mean? You can use like a margarine container. The top of a margarine container, that plastic, you can cut circles out of that and make shims to make your tiller actually bolt securely onto your rudder head. And those plastic shims won't inhibit the amount that your tiller can move up and down for docking and all that stuff. So there's that. Your lines. I guess we already talked about the new lines and old boats. So that's something that we really, as you're going out and buying new lines, we go out and buy new jib sheets that are super high quality jib sheets. It's just one part of the equation. Let's look at everything else in there. Does that jib car, does the sheave in that jib car have 3 chunks taken out of it from the years? Because that's something that you see on a lot of old boats. A lot of times, those sheaves and like the actual parts we need to rebuild this are pretty cheap. You know what I mean? It's not like you need to buy the full jib car. You can go to the binnacle, you can get that little sheave, drive the pin out, take the bolt out, put the new one in. Little things like that, they're going to make those new sheets actually nice. You know what I mean? There's nothing worse than you just spent $200-300 on jib sheets and they still snatch up every tack because there's a nick on the side of the jib car. So I guess all I'm going to say there is look at the whole thing as a system. We often think about the most easy to buy thing at the store, but that's like buying new tires for your car when you really need a wheel bearing. It's going to drive better, but the sound of the wheel bearing is still there and stuff. So that's to be considered with the new lines. And then lifelines. I think everybody could always look at lifelines on your boat. I mean, the one thing that I've learned over years is the plastic-coated lifelines that gets all sun-shocked and cracks off. It's the worst thing in the world. You know what I mean? All the people that come on your boat lean against it. It gets caught in their hair. It's absolutely brutal. Nobody wants to hike against it. New lifelines for most boats are like $200. You know what I mean? Or less. To go to North Sails with your old one, take them this time of the year, take them into North Sails, say, I just want these replicated with new, and get a new set made. Because for the small price, it's not worth messing with them. Lifelines are one of those things that when you're falling off your boat, that's what you're going to grab. And I guarantee the $200 on lifelines
Well spent.
was very small that day that you're falling off your boat. You know what I mean? So I guess that was my last point I wanted to bring up was the lifeline thing. And really, if we're going to talk about spending money on our boat, let's talk about spending money on keeping people in the boat first. So, questions?
How can I inspect rod rigging?
Yeah, the rod rigging is very hard to be inspected.
When you say rod rigging, what do you mean?
So we either have our shrouds are either going to be a wound wire, you know what I mean? A multiple stainless steel wires twisted together, or it's going to be one solid piece of stainless, almost like a stainless rod. The thing about stainless is it does corrode. Everybody thinks that stainless is the greatest thing because it doesn't rust. Well, it does. And the problem is that it rusts kind of from the inside out. And what it does is it has like crevice corrosion is what they call it. And if you were to look at it microscopically, it's woodwork, like worms going through wood. You know what I mean? So it kind of channels its own little path out, makes a stress riser in the stainless, and the next thing you know, it just breaks. So rod rigging, although it is the most sought after thing, it's very much something that can't be inspected. And if you can't inspect something, then you have to just go with an age of use. And so one thing that they say, if you're a cruising boat, if you're going to go blue water sailing, you don't have your standing rigging any more than like 10 years old. Any more than 10 years old is just unheard of. Well, most of us, our shrouds on our boats are 10 years old at this point. But we're doing interbasin sailing. We see it. We check it every year. Rod rigging, the thing about checking it every year is it doesn't like to be handled. So when you take your mast down and you have to coil your rod rigging, like, you gotta be really careful with that. And so for a club like this, for people that are taking the mast down every winter, putting your mast over on the mast rack and stuff, as far as rod rigging goes, it's sweet, but I wouldn't say it's economical for this sort of application.
What are we inspecting on the wire rope rigging?
Like the biggest thing you're looking for is it's going to be around the fittings. You know what I mean? Chances are you're not going to find anything on your rigging unless you had a flag. Anytime, like anything that held moisture on rigging is really bad for it. You know what I mean? So if you had tape around a lot of times people have random tape marks, piece of tape, electrical tape on your shrouds to indicate settings for your jib and stuff like that. You want to take that electrical tape off and inspect underneath it, because anytime there's being water held, or at the bottom of your shrouds when you see the actual Nyko press like fitting on it, check around the top of that. If you're going to see corrosion, it's going to have crack right there first. So make sure you actually look around at every single strand around that fitting to make sure it's continuous. Obviously, like tea staining, what they call that, like rust that kind of comes out of your rigging, it's inevitable. I mean, you can have tea staining on a 6-month-old shroud. Maintenance on that is the biggest thing. Don't let it build up. Something as simple as lemon juice. It has enough acid in it to clean the tea staining off your rigging. Don't be afraid to do that. But the biggest thing with your rigging is it's going to be at your fittings. And so as you're going to put your mast up this spring, check everything over and then roll everything in your hand too. If there's the end of your shroud and you have your press fitting, kind of hold your fitting in this end, hold your shroud. Don't do it like crazy, but give it a little bit of a work. You know what I mean? Give it a little bit of a work. You should be able to take that, right? And if it at all seems sketcy, again, just go and get new stuff. I know for like my J24, all new shrouds and everything is like $400. You know what I mean? It was for all 4 new shrouds was $400.
Because I mean, with the age of our boats, most of them, a mast coming down is the boat written off.
Oh yeah, anything happens to a boat, a boat of an older age, it's written off. I mean, there's boats getting written off now over hitting the dock. Just because by the time you actually put it through insurance, you look at, as soon as the boat needs a repair on the side of the boat, it needs a paint job on the side of the boat. That whole boat needs to be painted, and now you've exceeded, the value of the boat. So dropping a mast, could be pretty bad.
Terminal.
Yeah, it could be the end of an old boat. So.
Anybody else have any questions?
If you could just spend a few words on how you treat portholes and windows, because that seems to be a leaky problem.
So I guess most portholes and windows are leaky because they, remember how I was talking about bedding and all the sealant it's only good for so long. As sealant, even around your window frames, gets old, it starts to dry up a bit. And as like polyurethane sealants, hopefully it's not silicone-based sealants. Try to avoid silicone if you can. It's just absolutely horrid for boats. Polyurethane-based sealants are what you want to use, but they shrink up over time. And so the hardest thing is that it's shrinking back from around the window frame. And the only way to really address that is to pop that entire window. Like I've seen people try and caulk around the edge of the windows. You know, it's never going to fully seal. The only way to actually get port windows to reseal is to pull that entire frame out, scrape all the old sealant off, and bed it in 100%. Everything else is, you can probably caulk around them and get yourself a year, but if you properly take that window out and rebed the entire thing, you're probably getting yourself 5 to 10 years.
Two questions.
Yep.
Spider. You talked about cracks.
Yep.
Spider cracks, something to be concerned about?
Yep. We're at.
You got any for us to be concerned about, Gina?
Maybe.
Yeah, we're out on the boat.
Maybe. On that soft spot on the deck that I showed you.
Fix the bar.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
a big soft spot yet.
But it's going to get bigger.
I
It's
know.
going to get bigger. They always get bigger.
Yeah. So stress cracking is always from something flexed. You know, it's something flexed. If it's on the deck and there's a soft spot there, it's totally because of the soft spot. Unfortunately, you can't do anything about that cracking until you fix the soft spot. You know, so you can fix the cracks. They will come back until that part stops flexing. But if it hasn't gone too far yet, it could be.
Yeah, it's not.
It's pretty, like, fixing small core areas on your deck is not major surgery. It's stuff you can do over a weekend. Most people can do.
I also have a bent stanchion. Will bending it back straight reduce the strength?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
You can totally bend it back into shape, but like once it's bent in that area, it's good. You know, you're prone to bend again.
How about electrical wiring? Is there something you could talk about?
I guess the thing with batteries and all that stuff, you're going to want to make sure that everything is compliant for your survey, because that's one of the lowest hanging fruit for your surveyor when he comes and looks at things for your insurance. Easy things for batteries these days. Wing nuts. Everybody has wing nuts on their batteries. That's not allowed. You know what I mean? You can't have wing nuts on your battery anymore. So if you do, take those off. You have to have the rubber boots on the top of your battery. Like all of those little things have to be on there. It's just part of ABYC Transport Canada regulations. So everyone should start there. Definitely start there. Make sure your battery's strapped in. That's another thing that I don't see often on race boats is everybody has it down in a little nook, but it's not actually strapped in. If you look at what was the American Magic boat that sank, that was because the battery wasn't strapped in. When they capsized the boat, the battery literally fell down from one side to the other and punched a hole in the side of the hull.
Because they're heavy.
Yeah, batteries are seriously heavy. But as far as electrical wiring and all that stuff, in Niagara, the wiring is pretty shot at this point. You know what I mean? I haven't seen a Niagara where the stock wiring has been really good. And boats of that age, don't try and troubleshoot. Just pull new wires. Pull new wires. Get the proper tinned marine grade wiring. Use all the proper connectors. Use heat shrink terminals. Try not to use Amazon electrical materials. If you can, stick with the brand name stuff. I know it's cliche, but like the Blue Sea Systems electrical components are really good. But yeah, I don't recommend chasing problems around on older boats, especially for like a Niagara. It's a lot easier just to run new wiring.
Okay, I'll just kind of finish it off with a capstone one. So, being a relatively new boat owner myself, I find a lot of the projects really scary. What would you say is probably one thing that a new boat owner would be really scared of that isn't actually that hard to do?
Oh, geez. I think there's not that many boat projects that are super complicated to do. It all seems really scary. There is some videos you can watch on YouTube, like Fish Bump TV, Boatworks Today. There's a couple different channels that really break it down easily. Try and filter through what you can. Do as much research as you can before doing boat work. But the one thing I would say that everybody seems to be scared of that you can do yourself is gel coat stuff. Like if you got nicks in your gel coat, don't be afraid to fix your own gel coat. You know what I mean? Sand out where that nick is. You know what I mean? Get your gel coat from Burnside Fiberglass, put it on, and just keep building it up and sand it down. The worst case scenario, you're going to make more sanding for yourself. You're never going to hurt your boat trying to fix your gel coat repairs. And it's like the number one thing that everybody, they call me for, they get me to come in, they see how easy it was to do, they kind of feel like, I think I could have tried it, but don't be scared of gel coat stuff. If there's nicks on your deck, just, go ahead and try and fix it. You're not going to make the problem worse as long as you're not going at it with an angle grinder. And then the other thing is doing your bottom. I mean, I know a lot of people seem to be a little scared of doing bottom jobs and doing the anti-fouling paints and all that stuff. It's not too bad. It really is. As long as you're wearing your proper PPE. That's the one thing I'll say is, be scared of the chemicals. Don't be scared of the job. Go buy yourself a proper mask. Buy yourself the Tyvek suit. Put your hood up, on the suit, do the whole thing, You're going to look like a Michelin man out there, but it's 100% worth it. There's nothing worse than going out there, saving yourself $1 and then wondering what type of health benefits that you just did to yourself, or what type of health, harm you did to yourself.
Not worth it.
No, so bottom paint. So feel free to go at the bottom of your boat as much as you want. Use that sander. Just make sure you wear a respirator and get a good respirator. Don't just use a dust mask. The mask that prevented COVID from spreading around is not good to keep bottom paint from going in your lungs. But yeah, that would be my biggest thing is don't be afraid of anything to do with sanding your boats, painting boats. I think that's the one thing that everyone thinks they can paint. And painting is one of the things that I would recommend people try to avoid, you know what I mean? Don't just take a paintbrush and a can of paint and start touching things up on your boat. It only takes a couple of years of doing that before your boat looks like it's pretty haggard. I guess is a good description. So yeah, Avoid paint. As far as decorative paint, don't be scared to sand the bottom of your boat. Don't be scared to do gel coat stuff. But the biggest thing is just make sure you wear the proper PPE, and that being the mask.
Be safe.
Yeah, I don't care if you wear the suit. I'm not going to criticize you if you're not wearing the suit or any of that stuff. If you're not wearing gloves. But if you're out in the yard and you're sanding bottom paint over your head and breathing it all in, I'm probably going to come by and make fun of you a little bit. I'd rather see people ask for advice and try it yourself and do it and be successful than spend a bunch of money on materials, get yourself discouraged, because it only takes I'm seeing a lot of faces around the room of people that are pretty into the boating now, but for a new boater, it only takes a year or two of discouraging projects before they're a camper. You know what I mean? Boaters have 1 or 2 years of bad experiences boating, and then they have an RV. And that's just that's how
they're just one bad experience away from an RV.
Exactly. So don't become an RV person. Just keep working on the boat.
You heard it here first, folks.
You can't race our RV.
Not with that attitude.